¿Qué tal? Bienvenidos sean todos ustedes. Welcome everybody. We have the pleasure to have a huge cast of incredible writers, incredible people who work in academia and work in technology, work in politics. They work in pretty much all around the globe. And we're here together to talk about one of the topics that has been in our minds, at least for almost a couple of years, and has to do with the narrative, with the kind of stories that we tell. And allow me to introduce all of them using in one single page, because believe me, this is going to be fully loaded. And here we have Ian Tregillis. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. We have also Mark Russell.
Hello, everyone.
Lonnie Nadler.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Tom Merritt.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Good to be here.
Paul Constant.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And last but not least, Blanca López. How are you guys? I hope you are doing well. And well, we survived. We survived at least a part of this dangerous and interesting times. So I'm glad to have you all in here.
Yes, I'm glad to be alive also.
That's all you can hope for these days.
For the moment.
All right. So we have this a specific topic, and we have a previous show that we recorded. It was in February of last year, and we focus on the kind of stories that we tell because, well, the post-apocalyptic future is something that has been taken, and we have been reading and watching different kind of stories that are really interesting, and we discuss about that. And after that, a pandemic event came in here. So I want to find out if something changed in the way that we understand these stories, if something changed in the way that we read them and that we want to project them, and in the way that we write them. So that's why I asked either to call them my friends or in this occasion, so that they can share their point of view about what changed or perhaps what didn't change in the way that we look at these kind of stories where humanity has to face the impossible and really hard events. So we're going to start with Mark. What do you think, Mark, that changed in your writing and in the way that you understand these kind of stories?
Well, I think that what changed is that it doesn't feel like I'm writing science fiction anymore. It feels like I'm more writing parables about the present. And I think, the word apocalypse means that which can be revealed, which is why the Bible sometimes interprets the apocalypse of John as the book of Revelation, or the revelation of John, because that's what it means. Apocalypse is a revelation. I think what's been revealed usually in an apocalypse is how fragile our institutions were, how shaky the foundations of our civilization truly are. And I think the only thing that's really changed for me as a writer since COVID, and also since the last election cycle we had in this country, is just how true that is, and how it's even worse than I had previously imagined. So if it's changed anything, it's made me more apocalyptic, and to the point where I don't feel like I'm writing about warnings about the future anymore. I feel like I'm writing about the things I'm observing out my window.
Excellent. So let's say that you took it's actually the literal meaning in there. So we have revelations in this way. So I won't be perhaps somebody else who wants to follow up with this. I rather won't be like pointing fingers like you're next or you're next, because I believe that I don't know, an idea can come to any of us and want to develop on that idea. So anyone wants to come next?
Well, I think building off what Mark said, what's believable has changed, and what's too obvious has changed. So the goalposts have shifted somewhat, as far as, some of the things that have happened both politically and with the pandemic and with natural disasters and climate change would have been thought to be a little bit too unbelievable. And now some of those things are too on the nose. If you work them into a story, people feel like, oh, that's obviously a metaphor for what's going on now. And maybe when you began that story, it wasn't. It's just that conditions change that way.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I actually have a book that was greenlit by a publisher before the pandemic that was about a new sort of plague sweeping through the world. And I decided to pull it entirely because I wasn't comfortable doing something that felt so on the nose, that was so close to this. And not to say that we shouldn't explore what's going on right now, but just the sheer act of like writing about a pandemic for me was like, I personally couldn't have stomached, trying to escape into something, which is what writing is for me a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think I've never been someone drawn to reading a lot of apocalyptic work, and I've, various kind of low-grade apocalypses appear in my books, but what Tom was saying, and what Mark was saying about sort of the fragility of our social structures, right? Our social constructs has been laid bare to me, and I think about how in stories that feature like a pandemic where the mortality rate is much higher than it is with the pandemic that we're currently living through, the stories tend to, I don't think, lean heavily enough into the extent of the social disruption that we're seeing from in real life, and so that makes me even less eager to explore that in fiction, because I don't want to have to go into that space to really think through what would it be like, and Y: The Last Man, like if 50% of the population dies instantly, the extent of the social disruption would be so difficult to get into mentally that I don't think it's a space I'll ever want to go to.
Well, I've been working lately more on script writing, basically in horror stories about how you can begin to mourn everything that you have lost so far. I've seen very, very tragic stories and that involve my current students and fellow teachers, and it's kind of crazy, but because it's like we are still at the crisis, at the climax of a crisis. We are not over it yet. Therefore, there are lots of things that haven't been processed yet. So there has been few cases in which the mourning has already started. So it's something very difficult. It's going to be very, very hard. I'm not thinking about what's happening right now, what we are going to face when we come back to the world, actually. They are saying that maybe in a month and a half, we are going back to back to schools, having some teachers gone, some of my students gone, or some of my grad students also gone. So I don't think it's going to be that easy to think a world of in which institutions are not going to be solid enough to bring some comfort to the ones that have to come back to the ordinary world. If there can be an ordinary world after this,
I'm kind of excited about one possibility for post-apocalyptic fiction moving forward, and that I think there were a lot of sort of easy jokes about how the pandemic has disproven Ozymandias's plot in The Watchmen, right? Like that the whole world would come together after and there's Independence Day where there's an alien attack, whereas now we know there would be like alien deniers and and people who are saying we have to fight with the aliens, and it would just be and I think those jokes are they're easy but they're true, but also I think that maybe that there's some hope that writers are going to get smarter about focusing on systemic issues like that, right? Now that we've seen how the system behaves under this sort of intense stress close up, that because I think a lot of writers, it's a combination of word length and laziness, and also not thinking something through, where you have an end of a story where corruption is revealed and that's and the bad guys are defeated and everything ends, right? And I think that hopefully readers will be willing to accept the fact that the ending isn't as smooth, as uncomplicated as writers like us have been feeding them for so long, and we can have some interesting conversations about what happens when systems are under pressure and how everything doesn't always flow in the same direction. So I think there could be some interesting political fiction to come out of this.
Interesting. And for example, for a follow-up, it was interesting how, for example, some of the things that perhaps in previous times, in previous years, we were wishing to have, like opportunities like have a remote work. It was something that, or perhaps you want to spend more time with your family. And it was some sort of like the monkey paw twist where you got exactly what you were wishing for, but in a way that you weren't expecting. And just when you got that, it was perhaps not something that you were looking for. And I cite this example. I want to spend more time at home, and then, well, you have to stay at least, depending on the country or in the place that you live, 3 weeks, 3 months, perhaps the entire year without going out. And something that changed, but in the way that we communicate, not exactly in the narrative, and I'm actually thinking about writing something about this, is the way that this actually helps us to bring some things that, because we have social pressure, weren't willing to accept. For example, people who don't want to be in public. And perhaps you live in a country who right now has a better conditions. Pretty much the 100% of the population is vaccinated. The death index is really low, but they still justify the fact that they don't want to go out because, there is a pandemic. And it was like, well, yes, we are like 5 years after the pandemic and you still don't want to go out. So something that I found, and it's really interesting, is how perhaps some inner desires or inner thoughts actually came and found a justification, found themselves right with this as an excuse. Have you find, guys, and here right now I'm going to name names. We're going to start with, let's say, with Ian, perhaps, to talk about this. Did you find that something of the true nature of the humanity actually came forward? Hopefully something positive, and hopefully a dog that I believe I heard some around there.
Boy, something positive. I don't know. What was the silver lining for me? A moment ago, Blanca hit the nail on the head for me, like talking about how, there's this process of mourning sometimes. And that it was like the perfect articulation of something I've been feeling for a long time, which is that I feel like I've been sort of in this slow motion kind of wake where I'm sort of mourning something that I can't even articulate. It was the pandemic coming on top of our last election cycle here in this country, coming on top of the growing inevitability of catastrophic climate change, coming on top of this. And I am an introvert by nature. So it was not hard before the pandemic to find times when I just did not want to leave the house. Now, I don't want to interact with anyone I don't know. And I live in the United States has leveled off in its vaccination rates. So we're, I think, kind of middle of the pack in terms of, across the entire population. Where I live locally, the vaccination rates are fairly good. I think it's, at least by our standards, 80% or something like that. But even so, I'm very wary now of interacting with complete strangers, much more than I used to be. In a way, I guess it's good because I'm naturally an introvert, and so it takes a long time for that to get to me. But it does, after 18 months. So I think, I think by temperament, I'm well suited to this kind of isolation, but you have to be almost a psychopath to not feel it after years and years, I think. So, yeah, it's a slow motion wake in mourning, I think is how I would describe the situation.
All right. Mark, any thoughts about this? Something that from the human nature that actually became and was revealed by these times?
Yeah, I'm also kind of naturally introverted. So one thing that kind of surprised me was, when, one, I was able to adapt pretty easily to the social distancing and not seeing anybody, especially as a writer. It's like, well, that's, you're describing my normal existence. But one thing it has done for me is that since we've sort of opened up again and are able to see people who are vaccinated or with the precautions, it's really I enjoy it more now than I think I ever would have before, because I no longer take it for granted. I went to my first Comic-Con since COVID started here in town at Rose City, and it was like tasting an apple for the first time. It was just feeling like I miss this and sort of enjoying the simplicity of the pleasure of interacting with people again. And so it did sort of, in a way, give me hope that there is something that perhaps as we come out of the pandemic, we will once again recognize the value in our common humanity, that we'll begin to realize that, yeah, in the end, this is what really matters, is these people that we've spent the last year and a half trying to save, and everything else is sort of like secondary. I'm not terribly hopeful. I'm not very Pollyannic about it, but I'm hoping that that's what prevails, that our long absence from our social life with each other will remind ourselves how much we need each other.
All right.
Yeah, I definitely reached my natural limit of introversion. I think it was about 7 or 8 months in where I'm like, even I want to go out now. So I think in general, we all, like any time of major disruption, whether it's wars or disease or anything, we reveal things about ourselves and about humans in general that we wouldn't see otherwise. Touching on our earlier points, we didn't see the world Ozymandias style come together as one, but we also didn't see people screaming, running in the streets, as on the other end of it either. It was interesting to see what we did right and what we did wrong, because I don't think it matched anybody's predictions or what they would have been ahead of time.
Paul, any thoughts about that?
I'm kind of at the opposite end, where I really have kind of enjoyed being at home. I've enjoyed spending time with my wife and our dogs, and before the pandemic, I was really busy. I did author interviews around Seattle, usually like once a week almost, or once every couple of weeks and things like that. And I had a very busy social calendar, and this has really taught me that I am happier when I'm off the throttle a little bit and I'm not doing as many things. So it's made me a little more cautious about what I agree to, just because I know what my time is worth now, and it's not worth necessarily going to a loud brunch and waiting in line on a Sunday and screaming over 20-year-olds who have mimosas at the next table and all that, so not that I want to stay home forever, and I certainly haven't. I've made a lot of time for friends and family and things like that, but I have learned how to say no to a lot more things, and I really want to do the things I want to do, like this. So it's kind of taught me the value of getting together in the other direction than what some of the folks here have said.
Lonnie, you come from a different country and a different context, so it was something similar, or what changed? What did you find revealed during these times?
Yeah, well, Canada wasn't as bad as the States, but my wife is American and my brother lives in the States, and so we still felt it. But it was a excuse me, an interesting experience for me personally, because my wife and I got married, and then 3 weeks later the pandemic started. And we were supposed to, our honeymoon was supposed to be driving from Vancouver in Canada all the way down to California to see her family. And literally the day that we drove across the border and made it to Portland was when our country closed the borders and said everyone has to come back. And so like it was begun with like something beautiful in our marriage, and then was immediately counterpointed with a panic. And then, you know, we had just been married and had to figure out how to, like, you know, it was, if there was ever a test for whether people should be married, being locked inside for a year was basically it. So a lot of my experience for that first year, especially, I kept thinking of Lars von Trier's Melancholia, and just like being able to find a sense of beauty while the outside world was coming to an end, which I know is like a very privileged experience for me to have had, because it wasn't that easy for a lot of people. But that's just what immediately came to mind when you were asking the question about like finding some silver lining.
All right, Blanca?
I guess more than something positive that I found out that I really miss attending to concerts. I actually miss that. And I miss my Magic the Gathering table and role-playing games. Even though I'm also an introvert. However, something that I've been quite fond of the last 6 months is the academic life. You can go to a lot of international stuff in the same day in different countries, and you don't have to move your ass from the computer, and that's really awesome. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do that. So I'm enjoying that. However, I miss a lot of people. Even though I'm not an extrovert, I'm not someone that is always with a lot of people. I really miss my students, for instance. I love my lectures when they are live. Well, and I can see how they're feeling, how they're reacting, even if they are falling asleep. You can sense something there, but right now you can't. No? You only see a box in the screen, and that's kind of cold. And I think there's a lot missing in that human process that we can call education. It's not only something about transmitting data. It's more like a bonding relationship. Very few people can see that. So I am really optimistic about the way people in Mexico is thinking about education today. I think it's different, quite different from last year's. Pretty much during this time of around this time of the year, I think something has changed about how we think about, for instance, education and creative processes. And I hope I know it's for the best, at least in grad and pre-grad students. I don't know about elementary schools. My friends with little children are living something like a nightmarish trauma, but I wouldn't know about that. No? Only about the bigger guys. So I think I am optimistic about that. I think we are going to. We have learned to appreciate the human touch, for instance, the human voice, the presence, the corporality, in not only the educational processes. I also found that the importance of being there, for instance, in the clinic. I'm also psychoanalyst, and even though you can have phone calls, you can have video calls, is not the same as feeling someone near you. That even though they are not speaking, you know they are listening, and that's something I think we took for granted during a lot of years. So I'm optimistic about how we are changing our perception of the world. However, there are other things that I actually didn't ever imagine people being so stubborn about so many simple things, just like wearing a mask. Well, me as a university teacher, people being skeptic about vaccines or the scientific methods. Wait, what? We're in the 21st century. Why are you doubting that, though? So there are things that have surprised me a lot, but I guess there's a chance, especially in the human bonding through this new way of thinking and perceiving human touch, human persons.
And it's interesting because there have been some changes. We have to reflect on these kind of changes. And perhaps one final question that I will begin with you, Mark. So in case that you have to run, so you can go. Well, you always can go, so don't worry. No, and for example, something that you have already mentioned, and I had a recent experience because I went to a film festival. And for example, I love discussing, even though I believe that something that perhaps we share is some sort of we're kind of introverts, or well, not kind, we are introverts in a way. We rather perhaps be working within a specific realm, having all in control, and perhaps I was like, I don't like to be with a lot of people. But the last week when I got the chance to go to a film festival, I really love to be discussing things with people, using the line before getting to the film, instead of fighting on Twitter. The civility that comes when you are face to face with somebody, something that I was really missing. And perhaps I can be like, okay, I got all the dose that I needed of being with people for 1 week, and this is what I needed for the rest of the year. But it's something that I actually really appreciated. Okay, so the final question in this case is, something that perhaps you think that can reflect these kind of changes, that they can be like really, really innocent things. And I will put an example. But what kind of things do you think that in fiction we took too seriously and they weren't as relevant? And the example that I will add, for example, in superheroes, in comic books, the secret identities. During the last year and a half, pretty much everybody, if you were outside, you were wearing a mask and sometimes glasses. And people still recognize you but for the way that you move. So it was like, okay, secret identities are BS. However, you can play with this in fiction, and it's like, okay, I always knew that Clark Kent was Superman, but because of the kind of things that he does, and because the way that I respect him, I didn't say anything. Similar to what happened in the Spider-Man 2 film, where everybody was like with Peter Parker and didn't even care about his secret identity. So perhaps it can be a way that it can change, because now we lived and we found out that wasn't not as relevant. So any ideas about that, Mark?
Yeah, for me, and this is true before the pandemic even, what I think is highly overrated in writing is subtlety. Like, people think, oh, it's too on the nose, I've got to dial it back, I've got to make this point, but subtly, I've got to hint at it, but do it artistically so that people don't, or it's not really clear. I'm not what I'm talking about, and I think that's kind of a cop out. It's because you don't have ultimate confidence in what it is you have to say. And my style, my preference has always been kind of to go the opposite way. To if you have a point to make it with a sledgehammer. Anything you have to say is worth saying loudly. And I feel that really subtlety sort of died screaming during the Trump era, and also during the pandemic, that we're in an all hands on deck situation now. We don't have time to artfully suggest that people should head to the lifeboats. We need to be, banging the pots and pans together. And I feel like that was in a way kind of validating, and I feel in a very tragic way, because I wish it weren't validating. I wish that we had the luxury of subtlety, but I feel like for me it's made my writing and the sorts of subjects I write about, the way I write about them, feel like they have a greater sense of urgency now, because we may not have much time left before these subjects are no longer relevant because it's too late.
All right. I will go. Paul, any ideas about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of have to sort of build on Mark's thing and say that, you know, like this fear about being political in your work, I think that should also go away. I think that you know, if wearing a mask is political, then everything is political. You know what I mean? Like, and that's not to say necessarily partisan, but at least like the idea that our actions don't have to do with everyone else's actions, and that you can do something on your own or be a rugged individualist who you know, succeeds on their own merits and all that. I think that should go away. I think that we are all interconnected animals, and it's really never been more apparent to me. I've always believed it, but it's, I mean, I think it's available. It's like the evidence is there for everyone to see. Like, we are all animals in a system, and politics is how you do things within that system. So if you say you're apolitical, then you're not paying attention at this point, I think.
All right, Tom?
I'll go with something rather than just agree with Mark and Paul, which I think I could do too. I'll go with something a little more local to me. If I were to have written a scene in my neighborhood about a virus like COVID-19, I would have written it as people walking along the sidewalks, nervous, you know, not willing to stop and talk, being careful and fearful. And there was a little bit of that, but I was surprised by how much our community adapted. One of the things that I had been doing every day before the pandemic was going out and walking my dog, and I would see people on the sidewalk, and sometimes we'd smile and say hi, sometimes we wouldn't, whatever, but you'd just walk past each other on the sidewalk. And by the end of March, it was entirely normal for people to see someone coming and sort of negotiate. One of us will go out into the street and the other one will stay on the sidewalk. And this was before masks. This was before masks were even, this is when they were recommending against masks, actually. And so social distancing was the norm. And it was interesting to watch how everybody became more friendly to compensate for the fact that they were doing an unfriendly act by moving away from each other. So there was more often well, I'll go over here, but hi, wave, smile, you know, how you doing, sort of thing. And it's a little thing, but it was a little thing that surprised me.
And Lonnie?
Yeah, I'll preface this with saying that my answer is kind of facetious, but I don't write a lot of science fiction, but when I do, I prefer it to be on the harder side with somewhat believable, logical explanations for whatever scientific technology or plot-related stuff that I'm exploring. And I would often get really down on myself if I couldn't find a real scientific or somewhat believable scientific explanation, because I didn't want to seem like a fraud and I wanted people to find the world believable. But the pandemic has kind of shown me that even when the science is presented and it's real, that people don't believe it anyway. So it's kind of helped me give up that part of myself and not feel like everything has to be as believable as possible, because most readers will either believe it or not, you know, depending on what their own preconceived notions of science are.
All right, Blanca?
Right now, we're writing a script about a sort of adaptation of the Red Riding Hood, and it has so much to do with trust issues. How can you, even though you can be polite, you can be civilized, how do you get to trust people again? I think one of the things that is being damaged during the whole crisis in Mexico, I don't know if that's a thing in other countries, but here in Mexico, we have a severe trust problem. We are not able to trust our neighbors, people when you come across the street. So we're working on that, how you're not expecting the monster to come out from behind a familiar face. No, it's just like playing Among Us. No, I've been working a lot with that video game and how people enjoy this kind of feeling of being in the Thing movie by John Carpenter, that you don't know what's going to happen with someone else, what if they are going to attack you, they are going to help you, they are going they're just going to ignore you, and how that's having an impact in our everyday life, no? So I guess the thing of how you can learn to trust people even though you don't know anything about them, how you can trust your teachers, your students, your acquaintances. I think, socially speaking, it will be also an issue because we are not being guided by a racial sign, a gender sign. No, it's not about that. It's about what you've been doing the last 2 years, you know? So, and that's something I'm not going to be able to know just by looking at you. So, well, it's about choices also, no? So, I don't think it's that it's not something you work a lot in horror. No, you're expecting that every time that rationality comes to its limits, but that's where horror starts, no? But, well, this is other thing. This is everyday life. How can you trust anyone? No, what you did, you wash your hands. Were you careful? Just like a Twilight Zone episode now. So, yes, it's been. We are having a nice time writing that down, and we hope we're going to be able to produce it in the next, I don't know, 3 years, because in Mexico we have the crisis has been managed differently than from another country. So we're still hoping that we can take that to the screen eventually. Let's see what happens.
And Ian.
Once again, Blanca has articulated something that I've been feeling. This issue of being able to trust people, being able to trust strangers. And I think what we're seeing, at least in this country, here in the States, many people are not being guided by the better angels of their nature, right? That kind of, for me as a writer, is sort of synergistic with the point that Mark had made before he had to leave, which is, about sort of the death of subtlety. And I see this in my, like in my working life, my workplace has instituted a vaccine mandate. And there's a small fraction of the workforce that are materially damaging themselves by refusing to comply. These people are losing, pensions that they worked 30 years to acquire. They're not a lot of people, but it's, non-zero. So that drives the point home to me that people have never been rational actors, but when you put a stressor on them, maybe people become even more irrational. And selfishly and somewhat facetiously, as a writer, that's kind of freeing, because maybe I don't have to worry about giving everything on the page, sort of a rational motivation, because there are bad actors and there are people who act irrationally maybe for the sake of being irrational. But I mean, that's just selfishly for me as a writer. But I keep coming back to, the overall point of sort of the fragility of our social cohesion. And I think that, a lot of fiction in the past where there's sort of everyone is sort of moving with the same current, is no longer reads plausible to me. And I think that is something that I shouldn't say we, but that's something I definitely have not accounted for in my writing in the past. The fragility and the brittleness of the social systems, and the fact that people are not all part of the same current. It's much more granular than that. It's the Brownian motion of the water molecules bouncing off each other in completely random ways, and kind of this nihilistic, anarchic view of things that I think is starting to come out in my writing.
All right, so we're pretty much about finishing this conversation, and there are a lot of topics that I wish we could get more time to discuss, and hopefully that will bring us for a third episode of this series where we won't be talking about apocalyptic events, but perhaps something more about a rebirth or a rediscovery. That's something that Mark mentioned at the beginning of the conversation. If people want to know more about the kind of work that you are doing, for example, and let's begin with you, Ian, they can find you in Twitter, right? As what's your Twitter handle? It's
Tregillis.
Tregillis.
Tregillis is the best place to find me.
And something that you want to plug?
Nothing out at the moment. I had some stories out last year. They're all in anthologies now. So I'm currently updating my website. It's only 5 years overdue, so that'll be the place to find that stuff. I'm very slow.
All right. Blanca, if they want to learn more perhaps about video games or perhaps about the production of horror, where can they find you?
Also in Twitter and Nuclear Wolf 79. And, well, enter under your own free will because I'm a Seamus moralist in social networks. So sorry someone gets offended.
All right. Lonnie? Where can they find you and what's next for you?
You can find me on Twitter as well, just at Lonnie Nadler. I have a short story in the Razor Blades horror magazine coming out on Halloween, and the graphic novel version of the second volume of Undone by Blood comes out on November 10th. So you can find that in stores and online.
All right, Master Tom.
I have an audiobook out, multiple narrators, story about a secret society that has always guided world events called Project Vera. You can find that on Audible or Amazon, and everything else I do at tommerritt.com.
All right, and Mr. Paul Constant.
I'm at Paul Constant on Twitter, and also my website is paulconstant.com, and I have a comic coming out from Ahoy Comics right now called Snelson, Comedy is Dying. The artist is Fred Harper. He's amazing, and it's a satire of the idea of cancel culture and exhausted middle-aged white men who keep getting on bigger and bigger platforms to complain about how they've been canceled and make a lot of money while doing it. So.
There you have it. And next issue is coming when? It's this week or next week?
It's what day is today? Tuesday. It's coming out tomorrow, Wednesday, the 13th.
There you have it. So there you can find it. And I also want to plug a couple of things. First, if you want to get the news about what's happening on the tech world, you can find Noticias de Tecnología Express every Friday, where you can get in just like between 5 and 6 minutes the most important headlines about this. And also, guys, I made a movie. Well, I kind of helped in the production, and now you can find it in Prime Video. The film Anadina, it's something that I helped in the production of this film, has finally been released. It was only at film festivals. You can find it if you have Prime Video in Mexico. I'm not sure if you can find it in the United States or Canada, but don't worry, I can get you a VPN or something like that. And I also released it yesterday, a commentary track that we made for that film, speaking with the director and one of the actresses that you can find in Churros y Palomitas. So pretty much that's everything that I had to promote. Guys, thank you for your time. Thank you for your insights, because it's something that I was really looking forward to listen. It's something that I was really interested, and it was over my expectations. Thanks a lot for your time, Blanca, Ian, Lonnie, Tom, and Paul, and Mark. Thanks for your time, and hopefully we will do another round of this in brighter times.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
everybody.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks a lot.